We've kind of run through at this point the broad strokes happenings of the closures from Xbox. And while, like, shocker, I'm going to mention it again, I have a degree in corporate finance, okay? I went to school to learn how to juggle budgets, how to manage all of this stuff. Like this is my bread and butter, okay? It's my bread and butter. With that having been said, I can look at these closures and perhaps deduce why they happen. Even if on their face they don't make sense, you can probably eventually whittle it down because they're not trying to like intentionally screw up their company. There's probably a reason why they closed them. With Arkane Austin, I think it's pretty clear that that was an example of a studio that they just felt was lacking in the skill sets and experience that would be needed to justify their existence effectively. Because Jason Schreier reported over 70% of the original staff that made Prey had departed by the time Redfall launched, and after Redfall launched, even more people left because nobody wants to work on a dead and dying game. So it seems like there was a skeleton crew there, and basically it was just dead. There was no... The Arkane Austin that made Prey was long gone. So for Xbox, they just decided it didn't make sense to keep them open. So in that case, I think that could explain it. As for Tango Gameworks, similarly, it seems like there were a couple of very, very experienced and big name devs that really justified the acquisition, namely Shinji Mikami and Ikumi Nakamura. And those two developers left Tango Gameworks in the last few years. Now, why they did that could just be that they got bored. Maybe they didn't want to work with a big corporation like Xbox. It could be a combination of all sorts of things. But it seems like when they left Tango Gameworks, they also took a lot of talented devs with them. So even though they released Hi-Fi Rush early last year, most of the development on that game happened in like 2021 and 2022 during the time these people were still there before they left. And after they left, a lot of that amazing talent that put that together also left. And so my understanding is maybe that could explain why Xbox thought that they could close them down, because they were looking at their future releases and what they were planning on working on in the next few years. And they just decided, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And we think a lot of the talent's gone, so we're also going to close you down. So I think that there's reasons why a big suit in a skyscraper somewhere could determine that these studios are worth closing. But I think there's a huge blunder that Xbox is just totally ignoring with these closures. And I tweeted out about it, but basically all I said was, I'm a firm believer that high morale is crucial to consistent quality work. It's also ethically necessary, of course. I think it'll be really hard for Xbox's studios to have high morale when they could drop something beloved like Hi-Fi Rush and then be shut down a year later. I understand budgets are tight and games are too expensive to make right now, but there are externalities to these broad sweeping layoffs and cuts, and I don't think those will be felt for a while. Basically, while it might make sense in the short term to close a group like Arkane Austin, like, yeah, you make a bad game, look what will happen to you, that kind of thing. But a closure at a studio like Tango Gameworks optically is horrible, because you're like, you dropped the best game we released last year and now we're going to close you down. Like, okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Your reward is closure. Even if behind the scenes there's been departures and stuff, and maybe stuff like that has happened, that could at least maybe explain why they chose to close them. But optically, it just looks like you're closing down one of your best studios right now, which is really, really bad, because all of your other devs throughout the whole company are looking at that example and saying, they made the best game last year that you released and they got shut down. So what happens if we drop a really good game? If it doesn't generate enough revenue or profits, you're just going to dump us too? So already you have devs that are not going to want to stick it out for years and years and years, because there's a risk of them just getting dumped the second that it's inconvenient for Xbox. There's no stability. And when there's no stability, you'll just end up with a lack of loyalty within the team. And the second they get a job offer from somebody else, they'll probably take it and flee, because they don't feel assured that they are safe within the Microsoft umbrella. And more broadly, like I've said many times, I think happy work is good work. In the short term, maybe you can crunch your way to finish a project, but you can't do that forever. And if you try to do that forever, you'll end up with a lot of departures. You'll end up with people that are just giving up and moving on. And that's something we've even heard echoed within Sony Studios. Naughty Dog, in the Grounded 2 making of The Last of Us Part 2 documentary, they outline how after Uncharted 4, a lot of people wanted to leave, and a lot of people did leave. But going into The Last of Us Part 2, a lot of them just shifted right from Uncharted 4, which was a nightmare to develop, and then they moved into The Last of Us Part 2, which was also a nightmare to develop. And at the end of that game's production cycle, when they finally got it out in the middle of COVID, a lot of people were also done and just ready to move on. And Naughty Dog, to their credit, which, I mean, they used to be known as like the center play, like the main hub of crunch in the industry. You'd make a Game of the Year contender almost certainly, but you probably weren't going to see your family hardly ever if you worked at Naughty Dog. That's just what the understanding was. It was like an open secret. But they completely got rid of crunch, and they worked very hard to get rid of crunch. And so now they don't serve meals at the office. They make sure you go home. There are like anonymous reporting portals. So if you want to communicate to somebody that your boss is trying to make you stay late, you can communicate that anonymously and be protected from potential, retaliation and stuff. They've done a lot of work to try and make that environment better. And I think in the long term, that will lead to better games that are more creative, that are more dynamic. And I think that that's great. Because at the end of the day, I think not just is it ethically mandated that you provide a healthy work environment, but also it leads to a better product at the end of the day when your workers are happy and are all working towards the same goal, right? But in the case of Xbox, I think the whole thing has been destabilized like mad in the last few months of layoffs. And this one especially, when you look at the Tango Gameworks closure, even if behind the scenes there's reasons for it, it just communicates to the rest of your company that even if you make the best game of the year that we release, you could still get axed. And that's just unacceptable. That is going to do so much damage in the long term. It's the most stereotypical like corpo mindset thing where it's like, nope, the worker bees will keep doing what they're going to do and it doesn't matter. No, it matters. It really matters, especially when you factor in everything else with broader dissatisfaction within Xbox right now, with the fan base being very frustrated, with pretty clear double standards where one studio can put out something that's pretty mediocre and fail to support it for months and months and months and months. But then this other studio does the same thing and they get shut down. Whereas these guys are still helmed as like one of the top studios in your company. There's all sorts of problems with this. I think a lot of it is probably coming from on high. I think a lot of it is broad sweeping decisions from our man Satya. And if you don't know Satya, he is the mega mind behind Microsoft's crazy success in the last decade or so. And I mean, I studied this guy in college, and anybody who's done a lot of research into him knows he is extremely capable. He knows what he's doing. But at the end of the day, he's still a corporate bigwig and CEO, and that's why he runs a $3 trillion company. He did not get to where he is by caring about the feelings of the lower level employees, right? That's not how you get to be the CEO of like one of the most valuable companies in the world. So he's very capable. He knows what he's doing. But typically what happens is that the CEO of a big corporation will hand down guidance, or the CFO, he'll work with CFO and the CFO's team will come up with numbers and stuff. But they'll say to the executives underneath them, basically, you need to cut 9% of your workforce, or you need to trim budgets by 6%, or whatever it may be. We're trying to increase margins to 15%. And in order to do that, you have to trim your team by 8%, and all the math will work out. And then we'll hit that target for getting our margins where they need to be. And they hand that down. They hand somebody like Phil Spencer that sheet and say, cut 8% of costs, go. I know we just spent $70 billion, but we need to get margins here. So do that. And then the CEO of a company like Xbox is in a spot where they have to find a way to trim 8% of the budget however they can. And that's going to come with studio closures and stuff like that. And it leads to making decisions that you don't necessarily want to make. Like I'm sure executives, okay, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are executives that do actually enjoy firing people. I mean, there's the classic apprentice thing, you're fired. And it's like a meme, right? I'm sure some people like firing people. But I'm sure there's also examples of people that really don't like firing people. And if they could be an executive of a company and never fire anybody, they would love that. But again, you don't get to be the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, whether it's Xbox or Microsoft, without being willing to do some of that stuff. So with all of it, I just think that there are many layers to these layoffs, but I think selecting Tango Gameworks specifically, big blunder, because it communicates to the rest of the Xbox family of devs that even if you do an amazing job, you could still be on the chopping block. And that's no way to instill confidence in your teams. That's no way to boost morale, certainly. And I think that's going to come back to bite them, because I think you're going to see further turnover at some of these top studios. And a lot of the talent that's there is just going to choose to go work somewhere else if they feel more confident, right? Yeah, Ninja Theory, hold on to your butts. Yeah, well, so the other big game that's coming this month in like, what, a week and a half, 2 weeks, is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. And that's an example of a game that has been in development for like 7 years. Nobody's talking about it. And as far as I know, it hasn't been delayed. It's still happening. It's still a thing. But it's just mad. Like, you can look at their Twitter post, and like this game is supposed to launch in like 2 weeks, and it feels like nobody's talking about it. Like, nobody. It's wild. And this is supposed to be like their big cinematic game of the year, and there's just very, very little that's been going out about it. It's very, very strange. There's just something off, and I don't know why. I loved the first game, but there's something off about it. But even these guys at Ninja Theory, there, I'm sure, are fears that even if it's well received, even if it reviews really well, they could be shut down just because Microsoft decided that they needed to trim that budget. Maybe they thought, we don't want to wait another 7 years for a pretty good game. It's just not worth it. Whatever. And that's no way to build a team that is going to pour their heart and soul into projects. And I think that that's the big miscalculation with Tango Gameworks specifically. I think if you're a publisher, if you're a distributor, if you have a team that releases a game that's very well reviewed, that should buy them time. Like, that should buy them their existence through another release. It's crazy that you could release the best reviewed game for that publisher and then still get shut down like a little over a year later. It's wild. I'm worried about Obsidian, Swordfish says in chat. Obsidian, I think, falls into the same group, but then again, a week ago I would have said Tango Gameworks I thought was safe. So who knows? This is part of the problem, is you just don't know where, like, if anybody's safe. But I would think that Obsidian is probably in the category similar to like BGS, where their communities have enough of a diehard fan base that I don't think that they're under that much risk. I think Xbox sees them as a very valuable studio with a lot of talent that they can use in the future, and so they're interested in keeping them happy. Same with Bethesda. I mean, they know that even if the Elder Scrolls 6 is kind of garbage, they know that it's still going to hype people up and still get new signups, and lots of people are going to play it, so that's almost more valuable to them. So all told, I mean, I don't know. I would be nervous if I were Ninja Theory, just because after this, it's like, even if the game's reviewed really, really well, they still might not be safe, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it's just madness. And so I think that closing closing Tango Gameworks specifically was perhaps one of the biggest blunders I've seen in the corporate gaming space in a while. It's really, really shocking and surprising. Even if, the talent might have left, even if the people that really made that studio worth it is no longer there, they're still, I mean, it's just optically such a blunder. It's ridiculous. He took my thing. Red flag, red flag.
16 times the detail.